This is the Straight Up Breakdown Podcast.
Exclusively on the Herd Out Media Network.
Tell it to me straight up.
Hello, and welcome into the Straight Up Breakdown Podcast, proudly part of the Hail Varsity Network. I am Greg Smith, I am very deep into training for this 10K friend. Today, I am joined by Hail Varsity Managing Editor and host of the I-80 Preview Podcast, Brandon Vogel. Brandon, thank you so much for being on the show this morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's been a strange off season. Excuse me, but I did still wake up on Monday with a little bounce in my step because new football season is here. We'll see how long that enthusiasm lasts. Should last pretty long. I kind of love college football in all of its forms, but doing well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do have the same excitement. I'm always excited for a new season. On our end, it's always kind of a hectic time just because we're running around doing a million things and you're trying to get everything done that you want to accomplish, content-wise. But it is still, at the end of the day, it's still fun. As my wife, it is not as much fun. We're on our morning walk this morning, and I was like, "So, are you excited for football season to be back?" And she's like, "If it never came back, I'd be okay. It would be totally fine." But yeah, she did say, "I'll see you in January." That was her kind of parting words on that.
Yeah, well, at least she knows the score, I guess, at this point. I certainly understand where you're coming from there. It's kind of like, bye, I'll be around somewhat.
Yeah, and it's always, you just drop right in. It doesn't feel like, I talked with my dad about this all the time. It feels like in this year, it's actually Nebraska for once, where it feels like that first college football game just sneaks up on you. Now, this time it just happens to be Nebraska in week 0. But it always just sneaks up on you no matter how much you prepare for it, which is both good and bad.
Yeah, literally the first college football game of the season in terms of kickoff times. Fresno State and UConn will get going about an hour after Nebraska, but I don't expect a lot of people to be flipping over from Huskers Illini to Fresno State, Connecticut. Although Connecticut hasn't played in a year, so maybe interest will be high to see the Huskies.
Maybe. We'll see. I tend to agree with you there. There'll be a lot of eyeballs on that Nebraska game. And we're going to kind of start there, though. Is then each week we have a couple of segments on the show, obviously, that are mainstays. The first one is called Coach Speak, where we go over something that a coach, player, or a talking head said, and then we give you the straight up breakdown of what they meant.
Coach Speak to Real Talk.
Everything's going to kind of have a Nebraska preview slant for this week's episode as we get the season started. So this week comes courtesy of Nebraska offensive line coach Greg Austin. Now, Austin had this to say when talking about his feelings last week about the run game heading into 2021. Quote, "I'm excited. I'm really excited. I'm really excited to showcase it. I want our guys to be confident. I want our backs to be confident in the holes. I want those guys to be confident in the systems and schemes. And I want our guys to be going full speed. I want us to attack folks. That's the mindset. We've got to attack people downhill. In this conference, the people that win are the people that can run the football consistently." End quote. Brandon, what does that mean?
It's an interesting one because I don't know about you, but I think it was Lubick who mentioned it first, and then Frost said it at some point later in fall camp. When they both mentioned that Nebraska was second in rushing in the Big Ten. And my gut reaction was like, no, that can't be right. And I look at stats a lot.
Right.
And it was right based on yards per game and yards per play. And I talked about this a little bit on the offense portion of the I-80 preview, getting ready for the season. But Nebraska's run game statistically was better than I anticipated it, than I remembered, than my impression of the Nebraska run game. So Austin's words there were particularly interesting to me, talking about attack. It needs to be a weapon. I think he also talked, I think it was that same day, about the running backs they have and being one cut running backs and the kind of guys who can make a decision and go. I think that attack part of it is key because looking at Nebraska statistically from a run perspective, pretty good, but why didn't it feel that way? We know Adrian Martinez can hurt you, and Dedrick Mills, his numbers were, when you dug into them, a little better than I remembered, but it just didn't feel to me like Nebraska last year was going to just run the ball at you and good luck trying to stop it. Can they get there now? I think Austin, and classic for an O-line coach to be this way,
Right.
Wants to get them there. And yeah, running the ball is kind of a tried and true way to win football games for all of time. So for that one, the attack was the part that jumped out to me. And I think that is kind of where they want to get to.
Yeah, and you know what? The reason that I feel like, and I have thought about this because I'm with you completely. Like when you look at the stats, they were better running the football in totality than you think, but it does not feel that way. And I think the reason is because of the thing that has been such a dominant storyline this offseason, which is they've got to get rushing yards and production out of the running backs. Right. And so I think because it feels like it was so heavily quarterback slanted last year. And that feels like something that you can't necessarily always count on. So therefore, you feel like it was worse than it actually was. And I think that that's why we've heard so much about now it's two parts. We have heard so much about the running back and getting production from the running backs for a couple of reasons. One, because it needs to happen. Two, because it's like the most high profile position battle that they have in fall camp right now, right? And so that kind of both of those things play into that. But I really think that that's why. It's because that when you dig into the numbers and see that it was better than expected, it's not also in tandem with, oh yeah, the running back production was better than I thought. And I think that that's how we kind of get there.
Yeah, I would agree because really the running backs last year were Mills and then Wan'Dale Robinson when they needed somebody else. Marvin Scott got a little bit here. Ramir Johnson got going a little bit in the Iowa game. But now you look at three guys, it seems to kind of ascended to the top of that race for Nebraska. And can those guys consistently produce? I also think some of kind of the cognitive dissonance I'm having with the run game in last year might have had to do with the shortened schedule and conference only. Like if Mills goes for 125 yards last year against Central Michigan or something, and that happens early in the season, maybe you're kind of gearing yourself up because then you're reading for the next week and a half about, Nebraska's run game is really kind of a strength at this point. Whether or not that was fool's gold or not, it just would have changed that a little bit for me. Because my memory of Nebraska's run game was like, okay, yeah, it was the best thing they did. It was better than the passing game, which, there was really no downfield passing game whatsoever. But I give a lot of that credit to the quarterbacks, particularly Martinez, even though Luke McCaffrey was in there too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, a part of trying to then figure out how they get better there is really interesting to me too, because I think it has to do with the person we started talking about from the quote with Greg Austin and his unit. I think that to me, one of the big overall keys for this offense is if that offensive line takes the steps forward that we kind of think they can based on their potential, I think that unlocks all sorts of things for this offense, and especially that run game. But I think that like being able to see, and I think that this is also part of why that cognitive dissonance happens, is that this offensive rushing attack thus far, like with Scott Frost at Nebraska, has not looked anything like the rushing attacks that you've come accustomed to seeing from this offense, right? This offense typically produces what you kind of think you might get this year, where you have a couple of running backs that are really producing at least a pretty good level. Like the absence of that has been jarring. And I think that that's kind of where some of this comes from too, is that if you can get to that, like if you say the those three main guys are carrying the ball and they're effective and they're able to take pressure off of Martinez, and then Martinez is able to sprinkle in his rushing ability, and that then looks a lot closer to what you hoped it was coming in. And by the way, it makes the offense better and more dangerous as a result too.
Yeah, absolutely. If Nebraska can get to a point where Adrian Martinez's runs are just kind of the cherry on top here and not the vanilla ice cream, they'd be in a much better spot. And I agree with you. I think that particularly with this running back group, so young overall, you've got Gabe Ervin, true freshman, Savion Morrison here last year but didn't play. And then Stepp as kind of our top three. And, he played at USC. He didn't play a ton of games because he was hurt. Right. So it's kind of an inexperienced group. If you can get to a point where Nebraska's offensive line is just staying on blocks and is kind of a force that I think their ceiling has them at. I don't know how close they'll be to that ceiling, certainly out of the gate, but even at the end of the year, that's kind of what you need, I think, for this group of running backs. So we'll see. You're right. I think that you look at those Oregon offenses in particular, where Frost is the OC, and they'd cycle in 2-3 running backs, and their top guys going for like 1,400 yards because they were gaining like 1 million yards every year.
So many yards.
But the thing that Nebraska really lacks, I think, is those kind of core runs, those 3 or 4 that they're just like, we can hand it to the running back, and we know we're gonna consistently have success with that. I mean, that was Oregon, and I'm not a huge scheme guy. I should probably not even talk about it, but they were pretty like inside outside zone. Like they just ran that a lot. Mm-hmm. They could block it, and they had the running backs who could read it and get yards in chunks that way. Nebraska hasn't had those running plays yet. Maybe in 2018, but really the past 2 seasons, that's been a serious lack.
I wonder, my wheels are turning a little bit on that, because I wonder if, with Austin talking also at that same press conference, like you mentioned, about the one-cut running backs, and what you hear so much about with, say, Savion Morrison, his vision, you hear that some with Gabe Irvin as well, especially as a young guy. I wonder if that means that you will see some improvement there on those inside-outside zone runs, because those are staples of the offense. Like I think that just studying their scheme enough tells you that those are staples. The problem is that they haven't been good at that. But if you just go back and think through in your mind about their most impactful run plays as an offense at Nebraska, it really has been that QB dart play where the offensive guard pulls out in front of Adrian Martinez, he reads it, and then he makes a cut and goes off of that. Like, that's been their staple run. And while that can be a weapon, it cannot be the number one go-to run, which it definitely has been over the last few years.
Absolutely, it has. You think about Nebraska inside sort of the 15 or the 10, like you're getting QB draw, or QB ISO, whatever they term it. It's a designed run for Adrian Martinez up the middle, and it's just like, when I try to think of kind of these past 2 years of, okay, what are Nebraska's like pet running plays? They almost all involve the quarterback,
right?
And I think that's something they're going to, if things go well for Nebraska in 2021, that will be less the case. We have this conversation next year. We'll be talking about different run plays if things go well for Nebraska.
Right, that is 100% correct. And we if things have gone well, we have figured out what those run plays are with the running back, which would be a great thing for Nebraska overall, because it's desperately needed. Now, one of the things too, and we've seen, obviously, we write about it or in it every day. And so we have been inundated with all of the fall camp talk, right? And we've seen all of the stuff. We've read a ton of stuff. We've done our own previews, all of that, right? So my question for you, as we kind of shift gears here, is, have you seen anything this fall, or heard anything really mostly from this fall camp, that has changed what you thought about this team overall heading into the 2021 season, either one way or the other?
Let's break that down.
Yeah. Unfortunately, to the bad side of the spectrum, it's not anything that I've heard from fall camp, but just the NCAA investigation, which we don't need to get into all that. It's been talked about plenty. Like, the infractions themselves are not a big deal, but Nebraska having to deal with it is the thing that gives me a little bit of pause. Up to that point, all of fall camp, felt pretty optimistic, and the scale for a fall camp is not balanced. Like, it always trends towards
Right.
towards optimism, but you were hearing good things, and going all the way back to Big Ten Media Days last month. It was kind of a different demeanor. It was less brash, more like, we understand, we just want to get some results, and that's what we're going to try and go out and do. The whole thing about that kind of changed that for me, just having to deal with a distraction at this stage. And that's all it's going to be. Like, I don't expect anything, Nebraska's NCAA is not going to finish their investigation anytime quickly. We're not going to know anything about that for a while. It's just there. And does it change the demeanor of the coaches? In some ways, though, it's kind of a good test with, no game stakes on the line, because one of the things with Nebraska of these past 3 years is it's been very easily derailed. So can they not do that? If they come out and play really well against Illinois, maybe it's a sign of a little bit of growth on that front. I mean, I know based on what the coach said, based on what the players said, my expectation was for growth. I expected them to be a little bit further along in a lot of those areas. So unfortunately, and I think some of this too is the defense have a pretty good idea, I think, of what they're going to be. The offense, if some of the young talent or just new talent at the skill positions really pops, can be pretty good. So I kind of hate to be this way here, starting a new season, but yeah, that's kind of it. I was like, things seem to be on a pretty good path. And now we've got a little bit of a detour just dealing with the distraction of an NCAA investigation.
Yeah, and it's really funny. We did not talk about this ahead of time. This is exactly where my mind went to, though, and it's both that, and there's another situation too I'll get to as well. Is that the distraction piece of it is what concerns me. I don't think, and I think this is fair, that Nebraska has dealt with outside distractions well over the course of Scott Frost's tenure. And I think, and it kind of goes into adversity, like they have not bounced back from adversity well, they haven't dealt with it well. And I think it's a very intangible thing, but it has been, to me, what's really held Nebraska back. And we could talk about all sorts of different things that have kept them from winning games. I think a lot of it boils down to, can Nebraska be a resilient football team? And it's not just the team. And I like that you said that Nebraska's coaches being able to handle this. I think that that's a part of it too. And I think it's something that doesn't ever really get talked about. And I think it's something that is extremely important for this program, is that how does, and mostly Scott Frost, handle these sorts of things, and how does he then project that to the team? Because there has to be some sort of connection there between how he handles these things as the head coach and how that trickles down to then the assistants and then throughout the team, right? And I think that that's something that has just not gone well over the course of these few years. And so I agree with you completely that this does then become some sort of a nice little test for them. Can they block all of this out, deal with the adversity, and then come out of the other side ready to roll against Illinois the same way that I think they were heading towards before all of this kind of came up and became public? Now, of course, they knew about it ahead of time, and they said that in that joint press conference with Frost and Trev Alberts, which could be its own separate podcast about how that thing went, but we won't go there now. I think even though they knew, it's still different once it comes out in public. Now, there's another thing that as we get closer to the game against Illinois that has really been on my mind, and I'm also curious your thoughts on this too, is that Nebraska, think about the amount of times after games under Frost that Nebraska has said in some way or fashion, hey, we were kind of caught off guard by what we saw in this game, right? That concerns me. And the reason that concerns me is we're getting basically an entire new team could possibly be caught off guard because we've got a new staff at Illinois. The closer we get to that game, the more concerned I get about that. And you start to hear people talk about it, and you're starting to hear players say, the preparation is a little bit weird and it's difficult because we just don't know what to watch, and we have to watch all of this film. You've heard some coaches talk about it too. I don't know what the disconnect is there, but Nebraska's had a problem with that and trying to figure that out just with teams that have run the same stuff for years. When you talk about the Iowas and Wisconsins of the world, right? And so now doing that against Illinois, who knows what you're going to get. You kind of think with a Brett Bielema team, but you just never know until you see it. That has concerned me as we get closer to the game.
Yeah, I think it's a big piece of it. And I think particularly early on Saturday, I'm expecting, Illinois to hit some big plays, and for it to take Nebraska's defense to get a little bit of time to get its footing, because it's all really going to be brand new, which isn't a good recipe when you're the only game on TV for the first hour, and all of college football is, college football's second sport is jumping to conclusions too early. So it's gonna be rampant on Saturday if Illinois, hits a 60-yard touchdown pass on its first possession. I'm like, that wouldn't surprise me. So Brett Bielema, you would have thought, be like, okay, well, we get what they're going to do. Like, it's going to be kind of classic corn-fed man ball. But that wasn't what he hired in terms of an offensive coordinator. He went out and got, a fairly young offensive coordinator who was at App State for a year and was at Missouri before that. His defensive coordinator is also young and viewed as kind of an up-and-comer in the coaching ranks, who is also coming from Missouri. So we'll see. Illinois also, I think, I was looking through their media guide over the weekend, had like 9 guys switch positions.
Which, I do feel like that came up a lot over this offseason.
Which is kind of bizarre. You like, I'm forgetting the backup quarterback's name for the past
Isaiah Williams.
Isaiah Williams. Yes, thank you. He moved to wide receiver. They moved one of their best DBs to wide receiver. So, like, it's clear that they kind of showed up and be like, oh, we got some talent here. They're just in the wrong spots. They have a wide receiver / kicker who is now just a kicker. So keep an eye on that. But it was just weird to, like, read through that and be like, wow, they're really, really moving the furniture around here. And Nebraska, it can go back and watch tape of those coordinators at their previous spots, but we don't really know what Illinois is going to do on Saturday. And I expect it to look that way, at least early on.
Yeah, so do I. And I think that it continues, though, also to go back to one of, I think, the biggest points of the entire season, which is Nebraska taking care of Nebraska and figuring out how to clean up their own house, right? And so on one hand, yes, Nebraska's going to see a lot of things, I think, this weekend that they have not seen, or it's hard to prepare for, or they're going to have to adjust in game to. That's kind of a given, right? But can Nebraska, along the way of that, also not be out there getting in their own way? So can we not have, for their purposes, the delay of games to start a drive? Can you not have the backwards fumble passes, the just complete missed blocks, or the missed assignments on defense, all of that sort of stuff? Because those are the things also that can help them kind of weather an early storm, so to speak, if they're getting their footing with trying to figure out what they're seeing, right? And I think that's how you end up going from, instead of, hey, Illinois maybe hit a 60-yard touchdown pass in that first drive, but they rallied, Nebraska did, to like overcome that. And, all of a sudden it's 17-3 and you're down. Like, that's how you get the difference in that, is whether or not you can take care of yourself as well along the way. Like, it'll just be really interesting. I think that the more I think about this game, the closer we get to it, the more intriguing it gets to me on just a number of aspects, because I don't necessarily get the sense that the fan base feels that it's this intriguing, instead of thinking Nebraska should just go blow Illinois out. I still think that that's the overarching feeling in the fan base, is that this is the start of a launching point for Nebraska by going out and blowing them out, not that they've got a lot of stuff to figure out on the fly.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, the line for this game as of this weekend was a touchdown for Nebraska, which feels a little bit low. But again, it's the first game of the year. You're projecting all of that based on what teams return, what they've done in the past, which is, where you start for any team. It's where you start for Alabama. But it's just, these week ones, or week 0 in this case, can be pretty messy. And we've talked and others have talked about how the stakes feel really high for this game, not just because it's a conference game to start the season, but also it's a road game. What if you don't win? Like, what's the mood of the fan base going to be like? And all that stuff's real too. Mm-hmm. But also kind of the last 2 points we were just talking about come together. So, there have been games in the past. Minnesota in 2019, leaps off the pages of that, where post-game they're talking about, yeah, they really schemed this for us and we weren't ready. So you're going to have that, because there's very little scheme to get ready for, combined with Nebraska's tendency of late to be fragile. Like, the start to that Illinois game last year was as bad as it could be for a team that has those tendencies. And just talking about, like, it wouldn't surprise me if Illinois starts pretty fast. Like, this game is going to be, it's important for the state of the program. Yes, it's important to win always. It's important because it's a conference game, but it's also important because it kind of tests Nebraska in a couple of spots where it hasn't been great for the last 3 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of, it's interesting because with the importance of the game, I hope, and I don't know how you feel about this, and I know that Scott Frost tends to say, nameless, faceless opponent, like we prepare for everyone the same, like we're not getting up for any one opponent, like any more than another. I actually wish that, like, go in, and we record this on a Monday, so later on this morning I'll be going down to the stadium and hearing kind of the first Monday press conference, and then we'll have one on Tuesday. I hope we hear urgency from the team. Like, I think that would be a sign, like in terms of wanting to see signs of growth and hoping that growth that we talked about ends up coming out on Saturday. I don't know if it actually has a correlation. I just feel like it does. Like, I feel like people actually speaking as if there's urgency lends to you having urgency when it actually matters. Like, what do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I feel like nameless, faceless opponent is the ultimate goal. Like, Nebraska's not there yet. Like, I haven't felt that way based on how it's played. Not talking about pregame stuff or like practice stuff leading up to those games, just talking about how they played. Like, I've not gotten the sense that Nebraska views Illinois the same way it does Wisconsin. And teams like Wisconsin and Iowa are in that nameless, faceless category already. Like, they're just going to come out and do their stuff.
Yeah,
and it's up to you to try and yep, it's up to you to try and stop it. And Nebraska hasn't been there. So I agree with you. If this week, we've got players being like, I hate Illinois. They're my least favorite team. Even if it's not true, right. I'll kind of take it as, as a good sign. It's like, yeah, nameless, faceless is where we're going. But for right now, it's like, we just got to win this one game. And we do that. And then next week, Fordham's going to be my least favorite team, which will be interesting because I'm going to guess, college football at large doesn't know much about Fordham football. I'm going to guess it's not something the players encounter on a regular basis.
Right. Yeah, I would guess so too. Plus, the other thing too, I would actually like to hear, and now that we've got to think about this, is if someone said, like, JoJo Domann gets out there today and says, I watched that Illinois game last year, not because they're doing the same stuff, but because I think that was a low point for us and it's a motivating factor to do better. Like, I think that would be a good thing. I just think that sometimes embracing those things on the way to the nameless faceless opponent thing is okay. Like, I think that's totally fine to do that. There's a reason why it happens all across sports, right? Like teams do this all the time. And I think that it has to have some sort of effect positively. And I'm with you, like that's the ultimate goal. But I just think that on the way there, you need to switch things up too, because you obviously have had enough evidence to this point that that's not how the team behaves. And so maybe it needs to do something a little bit different as you try to take a step as a program.
Yeah, the nameless, faceless thing is awesome and great. And it's kind of football at its core, I think, when you execute your stuff. And Nebraska has done that to varying degrees over the past 3 seasons, and not a degree high enough for the win total to be where anyone wants it. So, it's kind of, I got to see that execution before I'm totally ready to jump on the nameless, faceless part of it. Because that's where you want to be. I just can't put what Nebraska's put on the field in that category yet.
Right. So, okay. So now I did not prep you for this. So we're going to do this off the cuff. We're going to do a fill in the blank here to wrap kind of our season preview portion of this. And Nebraska will get closer to expectations this season if blank.
They find big plays in the passing game. I always try and look at kind of like every angle and piece together this big thing and be like, okay, here's where this team had been. Here's probably what they need to advance. And I keep coming back to that one. I won't go into like a litany of numbers here, but it's really shocking when you boil down what last year looked like. One, how little Nebraska like really went for those plays in the passing game, and then it's just inability to hit them. Like if you can add that to simply a similar rushing offense that Nebraska had last year, get a few shorter scoring drives, and the defense, which you would project to be a little bit better just based on how much they return. But even if it's just in the same neighborhood as last year, I think that's how Nebraska goes from, say, 6-6, 7-5 to talking about 8 wins. Like if they can consistently get some of those big plays in the passing game, it'll, I don't want to say it'll change this offense. It'll just make it look a lot better. Which, to go back to kind of where we started, might have tied into the run game part of it too. If you're getting 5 yards every run or 4.5, that should feel pretty good. But when your passes are a lot of swing passes, bubble screens, that sort of stuff, you're not really hitting those shots downfield. You think about the Nebraska options offenses of old, or even option offenses today. That's a defining characteristic of them. They run. They consistently gain yards on the ground. And then when a defense is kind of geared up for it, then they hit you over the top of the pass, and the passing numbers are huge. Not in terms of the number of attempts, but yardage wise. Nebraska's not an option offense, but if its numbers look that way, it would be in a pretty good spot.
And it's funny because that I go kind of, it's not the opposite of what you said, but it is the complement of that. If Nebraska they will exceed expectations if they can consistently rush the football at that 4.5, 5 yards a clip to where you're accustomed to seeing this offense be at. Because I think that, to me, that's the thing that unlocks and makes everything else easier. Because I think that if teams have to, just picturing this in your mind, if teams have to respect the rushing attack of Nebraska from the running backs, and the wide receivers are close to as good as people think they can be, and Matt Lubick certainly thinks they can be based on how he's talked about them, right? Like especially considering their depth. And I do agree with him. I think that depth is really good outside, but it can only take you so far if you're not able to rush the football, right? And so if Nebraska can do that, and then you get to a situation where, okay, Toure is working in the slot, but you can't really devote that much attention to him, and he's able to really get mismatches against safeties and linebackers. But oh, by the way, Oliver Martin, who is really athletic, is doing good things on the outside, and here comes the X factor, Omar Manning, and Xavier Betts is working in there. There's only so much a defense can cover. That's before we've gotten to the tight ends, because here comes Austin Allen, right? New captain. Like, there's only so much that you can devote out there if the running game is really gashing you. And that's why I think that rushing attack, and to bring it full circle to what we started out talking about, to me is the key for a lot of what has to happen on offense. Now, I do think if I was going to pick something on defense, I was going to say kind of the equivalent to what you said about the passing game. If Nebraska is producing turnovers the way that they want to and are designed to on this defense, I think that then lends into getting those shorter scoring drives. You don't have to go as long, because I know that you talk about this ad nauseum. Nebraska just has to go too long with their scoring drives. Like, it's just too many times where it's the full length of the field that Nebraska has to go. And for a team that has had a tendency to shoot itself in the foot, you're only increasing the rate of that if you have to do it in 12 plays versus 4 or 5, right? And that's just math. So I do think that if they can produce those turnovers, that helps as well. But it's such an interesting season overall, because you can really, we're in this case or this scenario where I don't know if anything would really shock me. I guess outside of, I don't know, say them going undefeated would completely surprise me. Like, that would shock me. But really, if they only lost 2 games this season, like, I'd be surprised, but I would not be just like floored and think that that's so far outside of the realm of possibilities. But on the flip side, if you told me they only won 3, then I would be like, okay, I could see how you could get there too. It's just going to be such a fascinating season.
Yeah, there's a pretty wide range of potential outcomes at the extreme ends of the spectrum. And I agree with you. If you think about that, it's kind of like a bell curve. It's a lot shorter between the widest part of that and the 3 and 9 side than the 12 and 0 side. And, that's just based on where Nebraska has been, which it is what it is at this point. Hey, but we got a new season, so maybe it can change. It's just, it's hard to project.
Yeah, it definitely is. And now every week we end the show with a segment called Put Them on Blast, where we basically put someone on blast for something that they did or said.
Put them on blast.
I'm going to go first this time. And today I am going to go with random people on Twitter. Now, this will make sense in a second if you have seen what I'm talking about. I don't know if you guys have seen this. I will link a couple of them in the show notes, but there's this thing going around called the Milk Crate Challenge. Have you seen this, Brandon?
I have not. I saw somebody tweeting about it's only a matter of time before Supreme puts out a milk crate. And now I know it was probably linked to this.
Yeah. So basically what's happening is there's this like huge amount of videos floating around on Twitter now of people stacking milk crates. It's basically, if I'm picturing it right, it's like 3 of them, 4, 5, and it goes up and then goes down the ascending way the other way. And the goal is for you to like walk up and then walk back down without falling. As you can imagine, that isn't going well, and it is producing some hilarious videos. Now, it's hilarious to us because we're not the one busting up ribs, but it's just crazy to me. And a couple of things come to mind and why these folks have to go on blast. Number one, your insurance better be pretty damn good for you to be out here doing this milk crate challenge. Like, it's crazy to me that folks would do this. And it's not, you don't get anything. Like, this is just, it's like any number of these internet things that have kind of gone around over the years, and there's been plenty of them. Is that I just never quite understand what the end goal. Okay, yeah, cool. You do that, then what? Like, they give you high fives, like the people that have filmed this, and you get a couple Twitter likes. Like, what are you really getting here? But I really didn't have milk crates making a comeback on my 2021 bingo card because who has these milk crates lying around? Right. Like, that's the other question that I really have. Like, where are they coming from?
Well, that's my first question as well, because milk crates are extraordinarily useful and extraordinarily strong, which I suppose is why somebody decided, I'm going to try this. But they're hard to get. Like, right. Real milk crates anyway, at least they used to. I don't know if they still do. Used to have printed on them, like, do not steal this. They're valuable. So yeah, where are all the milk crates? How long before, well, I guess maybe it wouldn't come out, or maybe it would be on TikTok and we would all know. Are we going to have a college football player miss the first week due to a milk crate injury? Got to worry about that. I'm also, and maybe this is just me being old now, but my wave for social media trends is very short because I don't get it either. I'm like, okay, like I saw it, it was funny. I saw like 300 other people do it, and now I'm done. Like, if you're like the 600 person, you'll be like, yeah, this is my version of this thing that everybody else is doing. I'm not interested anymore.
But that's where the problem comes in, because when you get to person number 600, you've got to up the ante. I saw one this morning that actually was successful, where a woman did it in heels and she actually made it up and down and it was totally fine. I was stunned that she actually made it. But that's the thing, is you've now got to kind of ante up here and try and do it. And all you're going to do is increase even more the amount of the chance that you're going to go ahead and get injured out here. So all of you have to go on blast for even attempting this. I laughed the first few times, but now you guys have got to stop it. So Brandon, who are you putting on blast this week?
Well, I gave you a preview on Slack. Well, I gave our group a preview on Slack over the weekend. I am putting on blast penalty talk as it applies to Nebraska. Now, I don't have a problem with specific penalties. If Nebraska comes out and false starts on the first drive of the season, yeah, be mad. It's maddening, and that's dumb, and there's no excuse for that. If you get flagged instead of taking a timeout, coming out of a TV timeout, which we've seen more than once, that's dumb. Don't do that. But saying Nebraska has to clean up the penalties, it is true for every team. And the thing about it is across college football, a team is going to average about 6 offensive penalties a game. Like, that's what it is. And then 2/3 of teams fall between, I think, 5 and 7, basically. which is the range Nebraska's in. Like they're not better or worse at these penalties than anyone else. Now, 2018, I think they averaged like 7.7 per game. So they were a little bit worse that first year. But the problem with it is we always remember like the particularly damaging ones,
right?
You know, the false start in the red zone or the holding penalty on after you picked up a 3rd and 7, they stick out. So I think that's why they keep getting talked about. I'm just saying that statistically speaking, Nebraska's right in range with like most of college football. So saying they need to clean up the penalties, yeah, they do. Alabama needs to clean up the penalties too. It could probably score 55 points a game if it cleaned up its penalties. I've just never seen a link between winning and avoiding penalties. They're just kind of one of those things, like fumbles, that just happen in football. Like they're just there. They're part of the game. So I'm done. I've had enough of penalty talk with Nebraska until we at least get some actual games, which I guess we will soon enough. And then we can talk about, hopefully not, but we may be talking about some horrific gaffe that cost Nebraska the game.
Yeah, it's funny. I did, but I didn't see penalty talk getting put on blast today. That's great. Number one. Number two, I do think that this has a lot to do with remembering some of these goofy penalties. I think that if all they did was clean up the goofy ones, like we're not like, because when people say clean up the penalties, they really mean like take it to 2 penalties a game. That's what people are trying to get to. I don't even think it's that, honestly. I think it needs to be no more coming out of TV timeouts, getting false starts or delay of games, getting delay of games coming like off of a kickoff, like those sorts of things. If you just stop that, the very bizarre ones, then I think that they'd be fine. I think it would be totally fine. I really do.
You using the term goofy penalties just gave me an idea. It sent me back to Jake Cotton's famous GIF penalty where he got the false start by falling straight backwards.
Classic.
I think in honor of that, I think somebody on the offensive line should do that every year. Just the Jake Cotton Memorial GIF false start penalty. And just be like, I mean, I guess this is, against what we're talking about here, where we're talking about Nebraska voluntarily taking the penalty, but I'd do it for the likes.
Maybe that would be the way to loosen things up. Like that way, now you're playing free, right? No fear of failure, all that stuff that we started out with. Like maybe that's how you get there. You voluntarily take one to start the year, in addition to throwing a screen pass or a swing pass on the very first play of the season. I want, by the way, Scott Frost to troll everyone by doing that on the very first play of the season.
How amazing would it be? Nebraska wins the toss against Illinois, takes the ball because it takes the ball like 85% of the time. First play, the entire offensive line, Jake Cotton's, we just made it a verb, falls straight backwards, 1st and 15, run a little bubble screen, and you're staring at probably 2nd and 11. It'd be great.
I love that. I think that would be perfect, and that is a perfect place to leave this podcast this week. Subscribe to the podcast everywhere that you can listen to them. Rate us and leave us a 5-star review. If you only leave us 4, I'm inclined to think you're a hater, and nobody wants that. Make sure you're checking out the other podcasts on the Hill Varsity Network. The Mind Your Own Podcast, Varsity Club, the I-80 Preview with Brandon Vogel is back, the Nebraska Preps Post-Game Show, and the Hill Varsity Radio Show. Also, you can check out the Hill Varsity YouTube page. I will likely be back on there this week with the recruiting question of the week. And you can find us on Twitter at Greg Smith HB and at Brandon L. Vogel. I will catch you guys next week.
A Huda Media Production.